Alright, patch 3.2 New Ascendancy build ideas for the Bestiary League Marauder Edition. Let's get into it. So starting off, I've got two builds this time for Marauder, one for the Chieftain, one for the Juggernaut. I skipped out on Berserker, not too interested in the Berserker changes, and I don't know how the Berserker's going to fare on Hardcore. We'll have to give it some time to see. But we do have two pretty strong builds here. They're both very versatile in what they can do. They can do maps really well. Should be able to do endgame bosses really well and Uber Lab really well. Just all around pretty strong setups. Starting with the Chieftain build, it is a Warchief Totem build. As for the nodes, we are taking the bottom two totem nodes, which are actually unchanged over the current version. They're just really good with the enemies getting weaker and taking extra damage, and then the totem taunt, all that good stuff. And then for the new nodes, we are taking Namahu Flames Advantage, which converts Fizz to Fire. Very useful. We're converting full Fizz to Fire in this build. 10 Fire Pen, and then every 10 seconds you get a bunch of physical as fire for a little while. Comes out to about 20% overall average Fizz as fire. And the second node is the classic Totem Leech node with a little bit of a buff. Gives 10% strength, 1% Totem Leech as life, and then 10% chance to cover rare or unique enemies in Ash, which enemies covered in Ash take 20% increased damage from fire damage hits. Basically, it's a 20% damage multiplier. It's really, really strong. So for the build, starting with the gear, it is a two-handed build, not a facebreaker build or anything like that. A full two-handed build, so we get the Combs Heart and we get the really juicy stats. This one should excel pretty damn well at farming bosses endgame, due to the Totem Leech and totems in general just being really safe for boss farming, and we have almost 10k life. We're sitting at just under 260k DPS per totem, and that's configured to Shaper/Shaper Guardian resistances, so that's like the highest you can go. And then overall, it's really, like I said, really, really tanky, high life with Totem Leech, very safe, can do pretty much anything. And we are using a Doom Sower, not the best sword possible for the build, but it's extremely affordable, and it actually works pretty damn well. I was surprised how strong this sword is. It's just all around a pretty great item to start off with. And I tried to keep it kind of sort of budget. I originally had a Zoph's Heart, Zoph's Blood amulet in. It's a best in slot for the amulet, but with Breach being phased out a bit and this becoming more rare, the prices are probably just going to go even higher. If you can get your hands on one, perfect. If not, just use a rare. For the rest of the uniques, we've got Devotos, lots of move speed, some attack speed in all of our decks. The move speed's really good since we're mostly going to be running around. Combs Heart, self-explanatory. Tomb Fist, I put in basically a one-socket version. Really good because you get the Intimidate on a hit, which makes enemies take extra damage. And then for the rares, it's pretty much just life, resists, strength across the board, and then amulet, ring, belt. If you can get Weapon L, you're gonna want it. Flask got Wise Oak for the fire pen. You need to make sure your fire is your highest resist or tied for your highest resist. Lion's Roar, another huge damage boost, and then some just speed flasks in our life flask. The first jewel is the one simulating all of those chieftain stats that we can't get in Path of Building yet. So it's got the pen and the conversion and all that good stuff, and then a little bit of actual jewel stats on the top. And then the rest are identical copies of a pretty straightforward 3-stat jewel. The big things you're going to want are like attack, speed, and life, and then whatever other damage you can find. And that pretty much covers the gear. Pretty straightforward stuff. For the skills themselves, we've got Ancestral Warchief, no surprise, linked with elemental damage with attacks, melee fizz, fire pen since you're full fire conversion, and damage on full life, and then increased area of effect / concentrated effect depending on whether you're clearing or you're fighting a boss. You've got your leap slam, faster attacks, fortify, put in culling strike because you kind of don't have many gems to run in this build. Not a lot to run. Even though you don't have many sockets, you don't really need them all. Got casting damage taken set up. Mortal Call, Vol Haste, good stuff. And then last Link setup is just a Stone Golem and our Flammability Curse. Elemental Weakness actually lowers resists by a higher amount, but it requires way more intelligence, so I stuck with Flammability since our intelligence isn't high enough for a maxed out Ellie weakness. For the tree, this is where things can get a little bit more interesting. It's a blood magic build, so no auras, you may have noticed. We're just getting all that juicy life behind blood magic. We don't need the auras for damage anywhere, we're good to go. But then we're pretty much starting at Marauder, traveling around for as much totem damage as we can get, as much life we can get. And then big things like Lava Lash for Pen. And really just Jewel Sockets if we can get them, since they're very powerful with the attack speed mods. We have RT, so we can't miss. And then travel up this way for Ancestral Bond and Avatar of Fire. Like I said, if you get the Zoph's Amulet, you could drop Avatar of Fire. You could really drop everything above Ancestral Bond and respec these nodes elsewhere. There are some life nodes to grab still, but it's a level 95 tree. I didn't max it out. But you got some stuff to grab if you need to get it. And as far as leveling the build goes, you would probably just level with War Chief Totems the whole way through. They're not quite as fast as Sunder, but they do still work just fine, and they're much safer. If you want to level as Sunder and you know what you're doing, and you can respec later just fine, all you go for it. But either way, it should be no problem leveling. Pretty easy stuff. And now on to the next build. We have a Juggernaut. A Righteous Fire Juggernaut, of all things, because there is some pretty cool stuff going on there. So real quick, let's get this open. Get this updated for the new Juggernaut. Is it not updated for the new Juggernaut? That is unfortunate. So let's just open this real fast. Very high production value here. But basically most of the nodes got buffed. The ones that we are interested in are number 8, number 10, number 12, and number 6. So starting with number 6, the 2-point node, you get some regen, which is good. Some reduced damage taken, also good. Last two stats are whatever. Armor, we're not getting a ton, not enough to make it that impactful. And then we're getting all of the endurance charge side of things. The first node is your endurance charge generation. So this basically gets edited in by just giving +1 endurance charge and then turning endurance charges on, since you're going to have them all the time. Number 10 is the interesting one, and this is why I really like the idea of Righteous Fire under New Juggernaut, even though you can do this as Chieftain as well, and I think there's going to be a lot of RF Chieftains. Chieftain does get more regen, Chieftain does get a bit more damage compared to Juggernaut, but Juggernaut, if you go full endurance charges like you'll see in the build, 5% area of effect per charge ends up being a whopping 50% AoE. So you have like a massively sized RF, which is going to be really good for mapping. You'll have a lot more coverage on your Righteous Fire to just clear the packs that much faster. And you get some good damage. And then the last note, Unrelenting, extra fizz damage reduction per charge. Some reduced elemental damage taken at max, which again helps the RF. And then chaos res per charge, which is nice. It's pretty much all the chaos res you're going to need for the build. So like the last one, this one's pretty good at doing just about all the content as a jug with charges. Lab isn't going to be a problem. Mapping, like I've said, shouldn't be a problem. It should be really smooth. And most of the endgame bosses, maybe some of the ones that deal crazy elemental damage, like Uberet Ziri, maybe a couple of the Shaper Guardians or Shaper himself might be a little bit sketchy, but anything that's mostly dealing physical damage and fire damage, no problem. Breeze right through them. So for the gear, we've got pretty standard RF setup. Doriani's Catalyst, Rise of the Phoenix, Comb's Heart, the double Combs Away rings for +1 endurance charges, and then a bunch of rares with life, with resists, and maybe 1 or 2 items with strength if I have them in here. You want strength because it's basically more life. The only rare really worth noting is the helmet, which I have crafted with the Essence of Horror for the 30% more damage, since it's the best way. Other than really insane endgame Elder helmets, it's the best DPS you can get for your Righteous Fire. And then the leather belt, There's a reason it's a leather belt, not a Stygian belt, is because I have it as an Elder belt, and it has the increased life recovery rate mod, which is pretty much the best, single most useful mod that you can get for this build. Without it, we could see just by... Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay, we're good. Very, very high production value. We won't fuck with it, but it gives you a lot of life recovery. It's a 20% multiplier to your regen. For the flasks, we've got a Witchfire Brew, giving our Despair Curse and a bunch of damage over time, and then just regular Ruby Flask, Sulfur Flask for some damage and regen, Quicksilver. The first jewel, again, is the one simulating all of the new Ascendancy stuff. And I think the rest of the jewels are all the same, save for one. This one has some resists on it to make sure we were good to go on resists without any buffs up. And then the rest are max life, damage over time, area damage. Burning damage is a higher number damage modifier than the ones that I put there, but they're way more expensive. I figured it was a little bit more realistic to put those in for the numbers. What you can see over here, we have a 300k Righteous Fire degen. Not insane by any means compared to something like the low life RF builds, but it's enough to get the job done. It'll kill pretty much anything in the game. Again, about 9,500 life. We have a net life regen with all of our flasks on of 3,000 life per second. A total life regen of about 3,800, but we're actually regenerating over 3,000 life a second. We have 10k armor on top of all the endurance charges. We're basically not dying to any fizz damage. No chance. And then we've even got almost evened out on Chaos Res, which is pretty much all you need. And then we also have our secondary skill in Scorching Ray, which also does roughly 100,000 damage. So combined between the two, this one is set up against standard map bosses, not super endgame bosses, but against map bosses, you're looking at about 400k DPS. Should take them out relatively quickly, and you can kind of face tank everything, so you're good to go. On the skills, we've got the Righteous Fire set up. Again, to note, this is in the helmet with the extra damage. LE Focus burn damage, concentrated effect with AoE for map clear. For auras, I put in Purity of Fire, Vitality, and Stone Golem. The last aura, you've got some open mana, 30%. You could put something like Arctic Armor in, but I left it open just in case one of the new aspect skills, namely the aspect of the crab that we haven't seen yet, might fit really well into this build, and you might want to save the last bit of your unreserved mana for that, so kind of just leaving it to see. We've got Orbit Storms with crit strikes. This is to help proc the Elemental Overload. Normally you have a curse linked to this as well with Curse on Hit, but since we have the Witchfire, we don't need it. But before you get your Witchfire, you might want to put Curse on Hit with either LE Weakness or Flammability or Despair to get that in. I got our Shield Charge, and we've got our Scorching Ray. Only thing to really note about Scorching Ray is you probably are going to have to link it to Blood Magic just to be able to sustain the cost. Otherwise it gets really hefty on your mana, which you don't really invest into any sustain on that, and that can be a problem. For the tree, traveling around, grabbing all the endurance charges, grabbing as much life as possible, and then regen where necessary. Things like Arsonist are really good for our damage. You need to make sure at the Marauder charge you go in on the left side for that extra regen per charge. We've got Elemental Overload, and then we travel up, or Elemental Equilibrium, travel up for Elemental Overload, and the big burn damage node with Holy Fire. And for leveling this one, this is one where you probably, again, same as the Warchief Totem build, you probably want to level it with Sunder, or you can do it with Warchief Totems, but one of those generic melee leveling builds. The tree's a bit different. You just get kind of all the melee stuff near the Marauder start as you level up, and then you'll have to respec it later, but you're mostly waiting on some stuff anyway before you switch, like your Rise of the Phoenix and leveled Purity of Fire and all that. But should be not too bad to level, and again would work very well as a starter build if you are confident in your ability to get the currency together for Rise of the Phoenix by the time you think you're really going to need it. Yeah, that covers the two builds. So, hope you guys enjoyed it again. I really like these builds. I think the Chieftain is a character that I have a pretty high chance of playing at some point in the league, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do to optimize that one and push the damage even higher, and I think it will be a very powerful boss farmer just out of pure safety of never dying unless you make a really big mistake. So I really like that one. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again for watching.